Welcome to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. I'm your host, Troy Hammond, and on today's episode, we're chatting with JD from Raygun. I've been really keen to chat with JD. I follow him on Twitter, and I've loved his story, which is building a successful company, a successful SaaS company, Raygun, getting investment, keeping it in the bank, and then just building it anyway. And I follow him on Twitter because I love his honest, authentic voice, and I think that's going to come across in today's episode. So enjoy.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning into the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
I'm quite fortunate in that I knew what I wanted to do when I was about 9 years old.
Wow.
And so I learned to program in QBasic when I was 9 on our family computer, the 486SX25 with 8 megs of RAM and a 213 megabyte hard drive.
So not even as good as your watch?
No, man, I knew what every kilobyte was allocated to on that hard disk, I can tell you that much. But I learned to program, and I always say to people, like, I'm not a super smart dude. Like, I was a solid B student, you know. But I was reading the help files on QBasic. I literally just went through the different programs that were installed as part of DOS, found QBasic, thought that was kind of cool, made a little game for myself, and I was like, this is neat. I put in the Encarta 94 CD-ROM, and I searched for software because they didn't have the internet then to learn anything from. I read about this guy, and I was like, man, this Bill Gates guy seems to be doing all right out of software. And so I was like, so on the one hand, I love building code. Like I use the analogy with people that it felt to me like discovering an infinite box of Lego pieces. Like I didn't have to bug my parents to go and buy 10 more if statements. You're a big Lego fan too, right?
Yeah,
getting back into it now that I've got a young fella at home.
Yeah.
And so I got into that. I then realized that there was also economic upside in that. And so I was like, okay, cool.
How do you at 9 know that there's economic upside? Like what? You must have been a smart 9-year-old kid that's getting B's or whatever, right? If you're thinking about the economic upside of a career at 9.
Yeah, well, I knew that money makes life easier. So I kind of set out to sort of go, I didn't necessarily want to focus on being the richest person in the world, but I wanted to make sure that I had plenty of cash. And so I'd been raised, my parents worked from home, and so we did talk about money around the dinner table, and I could see as self-employed parents, that there was good times, there was hard times and things like that. So I was just kind of aware of it. I will say, I had a wonderful upbringing. Everything kind of went about as well as I could have imagined. But I had that understanding of the business side of things just from hearing.
What did your folks do?
My father, when I was born, he ran an aluminium joinery business, and then that hit some headwinds with the 87 crash, and so he ended up working for himself from home as a wooden joiner, so building kitchens, French doors, and all that sort of stuff. So he's quite the handyman, and so he was always there. That was another thing that was great, in hindsight, realizing. Having your parents around so much, it wasn't like, oh, get home, they'll be home in a couple of hours. Like, I'll be honest, as a teenage, boy, that didn't seem like a feature. It seemed like a bug. But in retrospect, it was actually a really, really fantastic home life to be raised in.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you got out at 19, started Intergen. You knew that you wanted to be a software entrepreneur, or you knew you wanted to that software that could change your life.
Yeah, so I sold commercial software at high school, and even when I was at university, I built a business. I built 2 businesses. One was an e-commerce retailer selling computer parts, and the other one was kind of like an early version of what you'd see with Geeks on Wheels. So I'd drive around the Manawatu region in this horrendously old Subaru, fixing people's computers for a little bit. And so when I was studying, I decided that I needed a comp sci degree. These days I would probably advocate not doing that. But I got a comp sci degree, and I thought I will apply for one job. So I applied for Intergen, and then I thought if they don't hire me, I'm just going to build up this PC repair business. I'm making okay money out of this. Fortunately, they did hire me, and I learned what a quote unquote real business looked like. And yeah, I guess the rest of that piece was history.
And you made some friends along the way at Intigen, right? Like if we think about what Raygun and other things are now, it sounds like there's a lot of network of people that you met there.
Yeah, so I met Jeremy Boyd, who became my first business partner in starting Mindscape, and he was one of those people. I met him and I was like, this guy is just wired differently. Like, keep in mind, 19 years old, I'd already been coding for over a decade. And so I met this guy, and initially I was like, okay, I've got to be a better coder than this guy. All right. Like, shouldn't be too hard, you've been doing this a while.
The same sort of age and level? Or
No, he was definitely a few years older than me. I think he might be about 5 or 6 years older than me. But I backed myself, the arrogance of being 19.
Yeah.
And I quickly kind of realized that he just had superior, what I call stack space to me. He could keep more in his head at once than I possibly could.
Yeah.
And that gave him this native advantage that I couldn't compete with. And so we did become good friends. And so that was when I was like, what are we doing here? Like, why don't you come with me and we'll go do this thing?
Yeah.
And he came on board with that idea. So,
how old were you then?
So I started Mindscape when I was 23. So I did, about 3 years at Intigen.
Yeah, and what was Mindscape?
So Mindscape was the name of our first business. We built software development tools, particularly targeting the .NET developer ecosystem. That was the background we had at Intigen. We saw, a lot of the internal tools that Intigen built to try and make software delivery faster. We were like, hey, why don't we build commercial tools for some of these? But it was also a bootstrap business at that time. And so we did a lot of joint venture work. So we built, I think, about 4 joint ventures, and we sold a bunch of those. I think we launched something like 11 products before we built the Raygun business. And so they were all out there for many years. So, yeah.
What were some of those?
So an example of one of those was a product called Lightspeed, which was a high-performance data access product. And so companies would come and use that to accelerate how they could get data from their databases for their line of business applications. It was a replacement for some of the tools that, say, Microsoft built. So, Microsoft builds fine stuff, but, it's not often the leading edge or cutting edge. So if somebody found themselves in a bind around performance, they'd come and use our products. And so we built up a whole suite of tools there. We sold them all internationally from day one.
Is there any of those that you're like, oh, that could have been so good? That one, if we kept going on that one?
Well, I mean, we still use some of them. Like Lightspeed's still used in behind parts of Raygun. We still leverage some of those tools. We sunset a lot of them when Raygun became quite apparent that we had a bit of a tiger by the tail. So we sort of ceased selling a bunch of those. Some of those naturally end of life. So we did ride waves like, Silverlight, remember that? And all of that. So, nobody's buying Silverlight tools anymore. Yeah. But yeah, so it was a lot of fun. And we started that journey where we were above a drug and alcohol rehab clinic down on Thorndon Quay. Nice. $500 a month rent, and no air conditioning.
Startup
it was nice and stinky.
I imagine. So you've just moved offices again to to move on from Courtney. Starting above a drug and alcohol rehab place must have been an interesting time.
Yeah, well, I have some weird life experiences. So the thing that was interesting there was that it also had the smallest elevator in Wellington, and so we'd have to get into this elevator where 2 people, like you'd almost have to touch if 2 people were in there, and so you'd get these people that would hop in that obviously had an addiction problem. And quite honestly, like initially I was like, oof, what's this going to be like? And then I realized a lot of them were just the nicest people, that were just trapped in a horrible situation that they were struggling to get out of. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I've unfortunately my family members, close family members, alcohol addiction, is a horrible thing. And I have high empathy for anyone. It is a disease, unfortunately, but, pretty daunting for a 23-year-old software developer to share a lift with drug and alcohol addicted person initially.
Well, yeah. Then, like I say, you do get to know these folks. So, it was a bit of an eye opener in there. It never had any problems with it. But,
cool. Yeah. And how quickly did Raygun come about?
Yeah, so Raygun, we actually built that in 2012 and launched it in 2013. We didn't really push it in 2013, and then in near the end of that year, we got some strong acquisition interest to buy the company. And at that point, it was like, that's pretty strange. We don't kind of get these randos ringing up. And in this case, the person, I'm not allowed to say who they are, but everybody would know who they are. Yeah. So it was kind of like, not only, they were in the US, but it was like, this random phone call, and it's like, hi, I'm such and such. We're like, what? And so that was the point where we went, there's some gold in these hills. Yeah. Like this has got, even though, we were accumulating customers and doing well, it's like, we should go faster.
Yeah. And so what do you do then? So is that when you sunsetted other things and started to move forward on this heavy?
Yeah. So we did do that. So Raygun is not a heavily venture-backed company.
Yeah.
And so we already had revenues. We built this thing. We had customers on it. And we decided to raise some money. And I mentioned earlier that we had done a bunch of joint ventures earlier. Yeah. And so it was an interesting capital raising experience because we really did, like you'd call it a friends and family round, but the reality is a lot of those friends were actually business partners and other things, and there was an opportunity to go the other way. And so that was really cool to kind of be able to go, let's keep building businesses together in the same sort of group of people within New Zealand.
Yeah, and so for people listening that don't know what Raygun is, and I'd be surprised if there's many, what is Raygun?
Well, today it's a suite of tools, but at that point in 2013, it was a crash reporting product. So you can think of that as being like a black box flight recorder that runs inside code, and it gives you enough context when anything goes wrong that your developers can resolve those issues super quick. It aggregates and helps you understand where you should put your time. You don't want to fix a bug that only affects one person every 5 years, that sort of stuff. And then we expanded it out into what is known as real user monitoring, which is really sort of digital experience. What's the load time, performance, and then back-end performance monitoring. So while we started out quite heavily as a developer-focused tool set, these days I would probably be better to describe us as customer experience monitoring. It's about what is the experience people have with your software. And I often draw that analogy that I still think there's a lot of immaturity in the tech industry because folks don't see their software experience as being akin to managing, say, a retail experience. And I often say to people, like if Ray Kroc had started McDonald's and every second burger was full of rancid meat, how far would McDonald's have grown? Yeah. And yet, as an industry, most people still kind of go, don't really know, like we don't track anything here. The really cutting edge people do, like Domino's Pizza Worldwide uses us.
Fantastic technology.
Yeah, uses us through and through. They're well known as a company that really values customer experience, focuses on that, and it's led to huge success for them.
They've been quite innovative in terms of their technology approaches from day dot, right? Like they've tried to improve the experience for their customers through technology from way before pizza companies were thinking about this.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing, like our ideal customer, like sound maybe a little bit offensive, but it's like you have to care about your customers.
Yeah.
If you don't care about the customer, you probably won't see a lot of value in Raygun.
Yeah.
If you think it's important, you'll probably think it's the cheapest product you've ever added to your stack. Yeah. So that's where we kind of work.
Yeah. Yep. So Raygun, the name, fantastic. Love it. Yep. Like it's probably one of my favorite stickers that I've ever had on a MacBook, just because it looks cool and it says cool. How did that come about? Just from zapping bugs, obviously.
Oh, I wish. Let's go full nerd on this. So how did we name Mindscape? So we made a list of names.
Yeah. We
put them into an Excel file, merged them together. We then made a copy of that. There were 3 of us there at the very beginning. We each scored them in a 1 to 10. We then merged the results, we summed the results, and then we sorted, and the top one was Mindscape. And I remember that Jeremy had put one in there that was Railgun. He was mad into Unreal Tournament. And I just thought that was the stupidest name you could possibly use. And so when we came up to about 2012 and we were building this as a product, because it was a product that then became the company, right?
Yeah.
And so originally it was just going to be a product called Raygun from Mindscape. And 2012, of course, we started in 2007. And so it'd been quite a few years of doing different things. And I still remembered that Railgun thing. And so I was like, man, that really sticks in my head. Now I was like, Railgun is kind of a little esoteric, so we need something a little bit more broadly applicable. And so we shifted it to calling it Raygun. We'd also identified that our first product was called Lightspeed, and then we'd named future products after literally what they did to try and basically juice the search engine, optimization, that you searched for this thing, you found our product. And the reality was that actually a creative name seemed to resonate more with people. It made it more fun. There was a sort of an emotional attachment to having a cool name.
Yeah.
And so when we went with Raygun, it was something that I think really nailed it for being kind of retro, tech, cool, quite fun for that audience. But that's how it came about, out of the Railgun name.
Classic, you just ruined that experience for me, but thank you. And so Raygun takes off. It's a thing. You get a phone call from some company in Seattle,
Yep.
That says, "Hey, like it." You go, "Fuck, we better double down on this now." Then, so you raise a bit of money through friends and family. What do you do then?
Yeah, so that's the interesting one. So the revenue chart is the classic hockey stick at that point, and people always say to me, "What happened at the inflection point?" And I say, "Well, that's when we brought in some external capital." And they're like, "Cool, what did you spend it on?" I'm like, "Didn't spend it on anything."
Yeah, I've heard this story a lot, and I'm curious to hear about this.
Well, to me, I look back on my career and I kind of go, that was the clearest example shown in data of the power of focus. Because what it did was it meant that I didn't have to spend any more cycles on the other products that weren't growing in the same way.
Yeah.
Could just kind of go, look, forget that and
Go
just
all in.
focus in on this. So at the time, Raygun the core product was built in 6 months by 2 people. You don't need to raise money for that. And there's a general point I'd say, like, never raise capital for a company where you haven't even built the product. Like, and so that kind of helped us build the product originally by having some revenue and then the revenue taking off with that product. It was also our first recurring revenue business, product line. That shift to starting the next month with where you finished the last month was a huge stress reliever for me. So, yeah.
And how did you how did you find your first customers in the early days of the Raygun for a start?
Yeah, so because we had built Mindscape, it's probably better to ask how did we get the customers for Mindscape, because at that point we had the audience. We had tens of thousands of people that were already on our mailing list from our other products. We were kind of well known in the .NET space there. But what I did was pushed heavily on content marketing. And so people at the time back then, it was like, wow, you really saw around corners to see that content was going to be like the next big thing for marketing. Like, how did you know that? And I was like, wow, it helped that I was broke and I could write blog posts for free. And I kind of had enough now. So even when I was at Intergen, I'd been part of various teams. One of them was the content management team, and I sort of had a specialization in helping bring search into companies. So I had a pretty good understanding of how search engine optimization worked. And so that was where I knew the types of content that we needed to make and publish and get traffic to the site. We also, you would promote that. This was, I think it's kind of interesting these days with the walls going up. Like a lot of people go to Facebook, go to Reddit, go to 5 sites and that's it. Back then, you kind of went to a lot more sites. There was a lot more content aggregators and places
Forums
you can promote this stuff. And so we knew of a lot of sites where we could submit our content and then get backlinks and get engagement that way. And so that's how we built that book up early. We didn't actually start really doing anything with paid advertising and whatnot, probably for the first 5 years.
Salespeople?
No salespeople in the early days. And even now we're more of a self-service with a sales assist component. We have a successful customer success team. We're well known for providing really solid support to people.
Yeah, awesome.
Yep.
And so I remember Raygun as like being one of the early Slack integrations, and and I remember but that was around the same time that I think you actually moved, or some folks moved to the US. And so talk me through, like, how did you go about making a lot of these strategic partners with Raygun? Because it felt like you guys were early in there and doing the right things.
Yeah, so we were, from memory, I think we were one of the first 10 Slack integrations to exist. And I was in San Francisco just on a trip, kind of back then channeling a lot of the Rod Drury's guidance of just get on the bus, go over there and see. And I remember visiting them, and they were actually, they were still in a converted gymnasium at the time, and I went in, like I should have gone in and said I want to buy equity, not like I want to integrate with your product. And so I got some of the slack socks and just chatted with the team and sat in their kitchen, had a yarn. There was only like 10 people in the office that day. Like it was pretty chill. I don't know if that was their primary one, but I know it was super early on. So we did that. We've often been early adopters of a lot of things. I kind of see it as, look, we're a technology company. The point is we should be adopting these things. These are the marketing messages that tech companies give to normal companies saying you should be adopting it. Well, why are we not at the cutting edge? And so we adopted tools like Slack very, very early on at Raygun. Similar thing, we were a first 10 customer of Xero, because that actually launched just as we were launching. So we've literally never had our accounts off of Xero, which is kind of cool. Yeah.
And so who are your, like as a 25, 28-year-old guy around this stage, who are your mentors? Like who are you asking for advice?
Yeah, so I met a bunch of folks through a lot of those joint ventures. So, Mark Clear is a key one. I met him through Rowan Simpson introducing me to him. We did one of the earlier joint ventures there. Through that, met a bunch of other people as well. I also read a boatload, probably more than is probably considered healthy. And so I would often just have discussions around that. And, Mark did a great job of explaining a lot of stuff around, how corporate finance works. And, ironically, even going back to the Xero story, like I wasn't trained in accounting, but I was like, okay, I've got to figure this out. And the feature set was relatively slim at the start. Yeah. And we were lucky because just as every time we ran into some requirement, we would experience an improvement. So I remember we started selling our goods in USD. I was like, oh, what are we going to do with Xero? And it's like, oh, we've just added foreign currency support. You're like, yes. Perfect. So we kind of just grew hand in glove with a lot of that, of stuff like that. So I got a lot of mentors in that way. I mean, shifting the point slightly, I think this is one of the big under-discussed points at the moment about remote work is it's like if you're in your 20s and you're working a purely remote job, you are drilling holes in your own boat. And in my opinion, you are failing to build the networks and connections you're going to need in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. Because now that I'm in my 30s, I don't have time to go to every user group. I don't have time to go and do this stuff. But if you're going to sit at home, you're not going to build those networks. I wouldn't have met a Mark Clear if I was just sitting at home writing code. I'm
fascinated by this, right? Because I feel this as well. Like for me, we are losing the fundamental ability to make networks, to make relationships, to build EQ as well, by everyone working at home every other day, like every day. And so I think that, there's definitely, remote working is great, but I think blended as a minimum for me.
Yep, 100%. I mean, I love a good couple of days working at home. First to admit, my productivity starts to go down after a wee bit. I enjoy engaging and talking with people. I get a lot more energy out of that. I am particularly concerned by the number of senior people in tech who just seem to be like, wanting to martyr themselves if they ever have to go to an office. And I kind of sit there thinking these are the same people that love to talk about empathy but cannot relate to what they're depriving everybody else of. Yeah. It's like...
Is it, do you think, though, because it's just internet points and currency now to talk about whatever's topical? Topical is remote, right?
Well, no, I guess feeding back to that senior point, it's like you're not senior if you're not lifting all boats. And how are you lifting all boats if you're sitting at home just working on your stuff? And don't tell me, well, we have Zoom and Slack. Like that is not lifting all boats. And that's the thing. I'm like, I'm sure there's a lot of people who really never, ever, ever want to go somewhere again. But, it's like, cool, well, you're not senior then.
Yeah. Well, you're ICE on steroids, right? Like,
well, it's funny though, right? Because you look at the flip side of this. Do you want to train employers to just slip work under the door and get work back in the age of improving AI? And a lot of people don't seem to then like to accept that now you're competing in a global market and you might actually be in a really high salary position right now, but you're wanting to say, you know what, I am undifferentiated from this just going out on the internet and coming back with an answer. It's like, I don't think that's a particularly smart game to play, personally.
What do you say to the people that are going to be angry online about this and say, well, he's just a business owner and, you know, he wants his employees to come back to work?
Oh, well, so at Raygun, we operate a fully hybrid model. We've got fully remote people as well in the mix there where it does work. But we talk quite openly about those challenges and, you know, the problems that it can instill and how we make sure we integrate them. But even the remote folks, purely remote folks, we still want to hire around them and make sure that there's locals in those areas that they can connect with, you know, over time. You know, we're not there yet, but, and, you know, to the haters, like, you know, boo-hoo. Like, go build your own company and do whatever the hell you like. Like, you're welcome to just do that. Like, you know. Yeah,
no, I get that. So looking back at Raygun then, like you have famously said, hey, we're not, you know, like we didn't spend this money, right? And we did. So how have you done that? Like talk us through that. Like how have you been able to grow so well organically without raising money? Because this year ahead of us now is pretty pertinent for this topic of conversation.
Yeah, so I think this might feed back to your question about how did a 9-year-old look at the economic upside of software. And I've always looked at things through a commercial lens as well as a technology lens.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty rare thing for people to do, honestly.
I agree.
I kind of have the view that if you can combine strengths from more than one domain, you start to be a bit of a unicorn. A lot of people are so focused into one domain that they kind of end up with the horse blinkers on their eyes and not seeing the full picture. Anyway, so to that end, we've always been pretty commercially minded, which is, you know, for example, we don't provide our products in a freemium model. Yeah. And it's like, well, we're giving value, you should exchange value. You know, it's not that hard. And yet I'll often talk to tech founders and it's like they're almost afraid to charge people money. Yeah. You know, and it's like, well, do you want to eat? Because I want to eat.
I've got clients that have that there's like so many accounts being shared, you know, like between these big, huge companies that are like, there's 80 to 100 people sharing one account in there and they're too scared to say something to them because it's such a big logo. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? You know, like you've got 80 to 100 people in one company that love your fucking product. Sell it to them. And so...
Well, I mean, I would absolutely say I've also had the benefit of people like Lana Vaughan at work, who's co-founder in Raygun, and you know she's pretty black and white on that as well. Like, no, it's a business decision. Like,
she's your chief operating officer and co-founder now.
Yes,
yeah. She's impressive. I've seen her speak before. She's like impressive.
Very impressive, yeah. And that's the thing. Sometimes I'll be sitting there kind of going, should we, shouldn't we, what do we do here? And it's just like, no, this. And it's like, yep, actually, you know what? You're right. You're bang on. We should just do it. So she's fearless.
How do you as a founder bring in other co-founders or bring in an exec team that complements your skill set? Do you have a method to that at all? Or?
No.
That's not good podcast content. But
I know. Let's go with the honest. Like, you know, I'll use Lana as an example, mostly because we joke about this a lot.
Yeah.
So I know Lana's husband, and he said, hey, my wife's looking for a part-time role as a bookkeeper. And I was like, okay, cool. And then she tells the story better than I do, but we met at what was the Felix Cafe back in the day. Mm-hmm. I turned up, it was a terrible day. I'd been out drinking, I think the night before, at least she tells me I had been. And I turned up and I was like, okay, so what can you do? Oh, this, and this. And I was like, she was well dressed, well prepared, everything's there. I'm in a rain jacket, you know, and just like, okay, cool, yep. And I was like, when can you start? She's like, Monday. I'm like, cool, what's your rate? This rate. Okay, cool. All right, well, I'll see you on Monday. I just left.
What stage of the company was this?
This was Raygun. So this, at that point, our office was on Cuba Street. And
that was the one that you had to like go down the alleyway and back up.
Yeah. I still remember, and I hope that they're listening to this. I remember we had a Christmas party one time and a software engineer climbed through the window from San Fran Bathhouse and I was pretty chopped and he was pretty chopped and he's like, I've always wanted to work here. And I gave him my business card. I said, just send me a message. And I did bump into him like a year or two later and he said, do you remember me? Like, no, because I was pretty smashed at the party. And He goes, oh, yeah, you gave it to me. I just felt so embarrassed that I didn't follow up. I was like,
It would have been such a great story.
Yeah. And so anyway, to the point there was that this was way back when.
Early.
And, you know, it wasn't going in with a whole lot of a plan there. And then she just turned out to be one of the best hires we've ever made.
So why was she one of the best hires you ever made? What did she give you?
Well, certainly she had a lot of skills that Jeremy and I didn't really possess. You know, so she did come from a finance background. She is American, so there is a sort of a just get things done sort of mentality. But I tell the story to people, and I tell it a lot, and not a lot of people ever seem to take it on board. But I still remember maybe it'd been like 2 or 3 weeks, and she comes over to my desk and she said to me, Did you make that invoice and send it to, you know, XYZ customer? I was like, yep, you know, that's just a thing I do. And she's like, no, you don't. That's not your job anymore. Stop it. And I just like sat back in my chair and I was like, holy fuck. It's like the best thing ever. Somebody coming and telling me not to do work, you know, like so taking things off you. And I was like, oh, that's great. And obviously, you know, I think.
And to have the confidence, right, to walk over to the founder and say, fucking, that's not your job anymore.
Well,
mate.
and that's a big thing as well today in the business. You know, she very comfortably will very diplomatic about it, but will call me out on things, and you know, is a very trusted confidant. And, you know, there are times, everybody has those times where you go, oh, I think I really screwed that up, you know, and I can go, okay, you tell me, what did I do wrong there? What would you recommend? So having that sort of tight trust is really important.
Yeah, so just complemented your skill sets to a degree to answer that question, and like in terms of exec team, and then so what's the relationship like with you and Jeremy?
So Jeremy, unfortunately, has had to leave the business last year. He's had a bunch of health-related complications. So I'm still on good terms with Jeremy. We catch up. He's on the mend with things, which is great. But as part of that, he did leave the business.
And so what was the relationship like, though, from that early stage? Like, did you guys run like tandem, the business together tandem?
So yes and no. So around the time we did the Raygun product, we actually hadn't really talked about job titles. We were just like co-founder and director, you know. And at that point, we kind of had to put titles on things. And to be honest, you know, Jeremy has, as I said, a brilliant mind. And so you could take like a legal, I still remember this from one of the companies, we had a legal document, you know, like all these people had taken them to Bell Gully and you know, all these other firms. And Jeremy would read this thing and he'd be like, oh, there's a problem here, you know. And like all the lawyers would have missed it. And he could turn his mind to whatever, but his passion lay in the coding. Yeah. And so while he was very, very capable at whatever, you know, so we could have really good conversations about topics, and he really, you know, forced you to level up. His passion stayed in the coding. And so he would often work on R&D type related stuff and whatnot. So we used to joke a little bit, and I realized this is a huge pat on my own back, but we used to joke about the old Batman movies where, like I said, I kind of feel like Bruce Wayne, and that I come into the office and I'd say, oh, we need something like this. And he'd be like, come with me, Mr. Wayne. You know, go down and he'd be like, here's the Batmobile I've already built, you know. And you're like, oh, that's very fortunate, you know. And it would be a bit like that where Jeremy was like, oh, come over to my desk and just check this thing out. And we're like, holy shit, like this is amazing. So that was really cool. And so I just increasingly took on more and more of the broader business responsibilities. Yeah. I still...
Were you to your pleasure or to your disdain? Like, was that something you said that you're a commercial guy, right?
So I enjoy a foot in both camps. So whatever side I'm on, you know, if I'm CEOing, I'm usually, you know, longing for the green grass of the code. Yeah. And when I'm coding, I'm like, man, this is some pretty low leverage work. Having said that, you know, so I'll take a day or two every now and then and do some coding work. I'd never put myself on the critical path. I'll just sort of maybe do some old code cleanup, and sometimes it's just a case of I've been around so long, you know, I know which bits are not used anymore and can just help tidy it up. Yeah. So yeah.
Awesome. Hey, so I wasn't going to ask this question, but it came through on an Instagram poll, but it seems a little bit pertinent now with the Batman reference. Someone really wanted to know if would you be Batman or Superman, and why?
I mean, if you could pick, you'd want to be Superman, surely, you know. But
then you're Superman every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well,
Clark Kent, I
to be
guess, but
fair,
yeah.
depending on which movie you watch, Bruce Wayne seems to have some pretty severe mental health problems he's dealing with. So, but then, Superman, you're going to end up with, everybody dies, and you keep living. So, which one's worse? I'd probably on that latter point, I'd probably go with Bruce Wayne.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to ask that, but I felt it's pertinent now. All right, so back on to Raygun. So you've hired Lana, you've got a good team, it's growing. What do you think was different about it? What felt like, this is the one? What felt like that?
Just getting customers quickly.
Yeah.
It sounds dumb, but revenue going up is a pretty pretty good sign you're doing something right.
Yeah. And so why, but like the difference today in the, like product companies now, right? Like spending lots of money, spending all their money to get little customers or, to get customers. Like why was it so much easier for you to do it that way?
Well, firstly, I don't know that I would say it was easy. I do think we had a lot of benefit from those Mindscape years, and I kind of think a lot of those years were me actually figuring out how to be a business person. And there was no external money that I was letting down at that point by learning on the job, which was good. I guess I'd go back and say, is there a more specific version of that question or something you might be looking for in there?
Yeah, I guess like from what I guess what I'm trying to ask is companies now, so we're in this, like going ahead for the next 12 months, it's product market fit, right? Like we're going out, we're finding product-led founders, building a business, getting customers, not raising off the back of a napkin, right? And then just trying to grow. And what I'm trying to find out is how can we make it super obvious for other people that have gone through this weird 3 to 5 years where you can fucking raise money easy, and you don't really have to think about who your customer is and grow your product to sell it. How can we give them some insights to? It's actually a little bit easier if you go out and focus on just winning customers, right?
Yeah.
What would you do differently, right? So if you didn't have the forums and you were starting Raygun right now in the different world that we live in now, how would you do it?
I would probably focus on, like in our company's case, I'd probably focus on Twitter. Yeah. Just because the tech audience is quite big on there. If I was more B2C, it'd probably still be Facebook. Yeah. Those sorts of platforms.
So understand your audience.
Yeah.
Find out where they are.
Yep. I also think, frankly, a lot of people don't need as much money as they think they need, and it's a falsehood that having a lot of money somehow makes it better. And I think, unfortunately, right now we're seeing a lot of people where I say ego not in the derogatory way, but the ego's kind of got people ahead of their skis. Yeah. And now they're in a pile of pain because, when you have millions and millions of dollars, you can easily think, oh, well, it's 10K here, 10K there. We kind of had to watch every penny, and I still do kind of watch every penny. I think that's one of the falsehoods, going back to Twitter and what people think, you see a lot of people that's like, well, I would just do this or I would just do that. And it's like, yeah, tell me you've never run a business without telling me you've never run a business. Like winning in business is hard, you know, and it's like, there's no real cheat codes, and I'm just not sure that piles of money is actually a cheat code. I think it's actually a bigger risk, until you're ready to scale. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. So making sure you've got a really tight handle on your metrics. So one of the things that
what are your Disneyland metrics?
Disneyland metrics?
Oh, so Disneyland has a people in the park metric. That's their number one metric. It's the Disneyland metric. So like if we have this amount of people in the park, everything else, works.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because the metric that I typically will be focused on would move around over the years. So, I will typically these days try and be tracking towards a leading indicator. It might be something like activated trials. So the number of trials where people sign up and they actually send data to Raygun. The reason why that's a good leading indicator is because, a spam bot is not going to integrate Raygun into their software. So I just track that and how much are we paying to get those. So cost to acquire. Yeah. When we started Raygun, there wasn't really Chart Mogul or Bear Metrics or any of these things. So I actually built our SaaS metrics myself in the weekends in our admin system, where I had to go through and write all the formulas for like calculate, churn, calculate, revenue churn, calculate, logo churn, all of these sorts of things. And that was actually hugely beneficial because it meant that I had a really strong understanding of how all of these metrics interacted, how when I push on this one, these three will change and all of that sort of stuff. And that let us be quite focused on what was working and being quite honest at times about what wasn't. And that's another case where I think a lot of money can be problematic because it will mean people aren't forced to look at the problems until it's far too late.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Your team size it's always been like on the small, like compared to other like companies your size and your revenue number, but you've always tended to you've hired really well. Like I've seen your team and a lot of your team. What do you look for in a software engineer? Like what's the skill sets you're looking for?
Yeah, so I like to find people that are super passionate about software, like they want to code. I use myself as the example, and I use this back in Intergen, and as a general point, it's like when I was at Intergen and I wanted to be the best coder I could be, I had .NET posters up on the wall at home. I was coding probably 15 hours a day, not necessarily on stuff for Intergen. I was doing stuff on the side to learn and all of that and immerse yourself and really get, try to become an expert. Folks that are conscientious about, making sure they're delivering quality and, everybody makes mistakes, but how do they deal with a mistake? Do they go back and fix it? Do they just kind of put it on a backlog, that sort of stuff? We also, one of the things that attracts great talent to Raygun is we have really hard problems to solve. So we also offer some level of scale that you don't really see in New Zealand. So to give one example, one of our customers, HBO, we tracked 87 million concurrent viewers of the finale of Game of Thrones for them through our platform. They told us things like, hey, only because of Raygun did we realize the entire Nordics region was offline. And so you're talking about a small team of, sort of, we move around, but about 40 odd people. But these are people where it's like, you literally are running on 84 millions and millions and millions of devices. And, I was chatting to one of our new grads the other day, actually it was probably about 6 months ago, and she'd worked on a JavaScript file, and it's like, did you know that JavaScript file is loaded 1.2 billion times a month?
Wow.
So if you work at Raygun, yes, it's a small headcount, but the scale and impact of how you operate is crazy. Yeah. And that's the thing, is we want people that are similarly sort of outstanding, that kind of go, that doesn't freak me out. I want to operate with that level of impact.
So that's performance culture, right? Like a high performing culture.
Yep.
That's not something that's quite common these days. Like, well, I think everyone wants a performance culture, don't get me wrong. But the style of leadership has changed over the years. The style of how you run a business, the style of like what you can and can't say, or the style of how you push people to get the best out of them has changed. Has that influenced you and your style and Raygun, or do you feel like this is who we are, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to be doing going forward?
Yeah, so I tend to try and operate the business to a bunch of principles. So an example is we want to scale impact. That doesn't necessarily mean scaling time, So there won't be any times in the evening that people would be working, or weekends. There's not a lot of code getting submitted on the weekend. There might be the occasional time where some people pull together to ship some things, might go for a couple of hours outside of normal work hours, but they are pretty rare. And that's the thing, is I see it as, I think a lot of companies have made the mistake of building adult daycares and not realizing that is the antithesis of a high performing culture. But a lot of people falsely frame the flip side of that as a grind culture. And it's like, no, it's not. That is a false frame. You can, I'll tell this story, but I remember years ago at Summer Tech for the grad program, and I was the last speaker for the 2-minute speed dating. And these other folks had got up from other companies and they're like, come and work at us, we have a slide, come and work with us, we have pool tables, come and work with us, we have a disco ball. And I got up and I said, come and work at Raygun. We don't have a disco ball, we don't have a slide, and we don't have a pool table, but what we have is really gnarly tech problems for you to come and work on. And the student came up to me afterwards and he said, I cannot figure out why these companies think we went to university to come and play pool.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, it's because they don't have a clue. They think that's what people want. That's not why you're going for work. And then, of course, you kind of go, well, what are you doing in your work day? Well, at Raygun, our view is you're at work to work. And that's why we're not going to try and say you should be working till 9 o'clock, several nights a week because blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I should qualify, we are a small company, though, that some of the teams not in engineering, like customer success, and this is part of our global rollout, is actually to sort of lighten the weight on the team, is we do calls with customers at some odd hours, but then you kind of go, look, if you've done a bunch of calls at 10 o'clock at night, like take a day and loop, that sort of thing. So just being sensible.
Yeah. So I think there's something, like for me, that is sensible, right? Like you turn up to work, you work from 9 to 5, give the best you can until 9 to 5, switch the fuck off afterwards, do what the hell we whatever, do recharge, work on your own side project, do what you want, right? Like I'm 100% in your camp in terms of we have a lot of companies that are adult daycares now, and I can walk into a business and within about 5 minutes, if they've asked me to recruit, I can see who's going to be successful and who's not going to be successful to a degree, right? Like I'm not a fortune teller, but I can understand the culture pretty quickly, and I can understand if it's a performance culture built off wanting to grow a business commercially, or if it's a passion thing that, ideology type thing, right? But I feel like it's getting lost a little bit in the way, like in terms of there is the hard extreme, like you talked about before, like hustle culture, on one side, and then there's like, adult daycare on the other side. That middle part, I think that you and I are talking about, is just standard, right? Like it's just in the middle of come to work, do the best you can and go home, right? Create a good environment where people can learn, create a good environment where people are inspired and they want to push themselves out of their comfort zone so that they are challenging themselves and are growing personally.
Yep.
I think we're losing that in business a little bit, and I think it's an interesting time. I'm watching over the next couple of years to see what's happening in business, and
Well, my sort of take on it is to be wary of businesses that are selling not the work. Because the reality is most of the time is the work. And so like...
But do you think that that's because the business is doing that because they think that's what they can offer, or that that's what the market wants?
I think they might delude themselves into thinking that's what the market wants. But I think like having any difficult conversations, people just sort of shy away from saying I need people to work hard sometimes.
Yeah. What's your take on when Elon said we don't need this amount of people to run Twitter?
7,500 people for an app. Holy shit. No. And there's plenty of companies that should be Elon'd up as well. That's just fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting time going ahead, right? Like to see like how many people we hired in these tech companies.
Well, look, the thing is that's been fascinating for me on that topic and is it's kind of like being in the eye of the storm because it's shone a light right on the tech industry itself. Yeah. And so I think there is a lot of fear-based projection from a lot of people who just like, how many people were like, Twitter's going to, this thing's not going to work. It's going to fall over. It's going to crash. And it's like...
Everyone was saying, this is my last tweet. Goodbye.
Oh, my God. It's like, this is the thing. So many people, like, the hypocrisy has just been through the roof. And it's like, you are aware you look like a complete numpty, right?
Yeah.
But... that's the thing is like he called that out, like that is a ridiculous number of people there, that's absurd and you just don't need it. I mean, the thing I would draw as a comparison is like, even if you look at a company like say Microsoft, now they did some layoffs. They're about, I think around 200,000 employees. But the reality is that's a company that also produces about 500 products. Yeah. It's like that, 7,500 for one thing. Give me a break. Yeah. And that's the thing is these effectively, if we take the adult daycare to the extreme, we then let the toddlers run the place. It's no wonder that the stock-based comp in some of these companies is through the roof. They're never going to provide a return to their owners. It's kind of bananas.
Yeah, what would you do if you were Elon? Same thing?
I don't think I'd do the same thing. I think he's made some pretty big mistakes around the communication side of stuff, which wouldn't have been massive for him, or hugely challenging for him to have done better with some of that.
Yeah.
I think, the thing I find really fascinating about Elon Musk, especially given the amount of hate that he gets, is he's also the guy that actually seems to live all of those sort of BS LinkedIn posts about be yourself, be fearless, don't, do all of this sort of stuff. And it's like, well, when somebody does, my God, the wrath of everybody at seeing somebody just do what they want.
Yeah.
Boy, do they get mad at that. And it's like, you do see this like social reinforcement of the problem right in there.
Well, love him or hate him, right? He's a person doing what he loves doing, right? Like, he loves memes, he loves to have a joke, he loves to be, and like, why the fuck should we tell a CEO to wear a mask because they're a CEO of a company that's X size or X revenue, right? Like, why the fuck should they be any different?
Well, I'm supportive of a narrative that he had recently that a lot more leaders, political leaders, not just business leaders, should be using their own voice to speak.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is it's like you kind of get this warts and all message from him.
Yeah.
And it's like, aha, we got him. And you're like, yeah, but like, does anybody talk about the Bill Gates Twitter account? No, because no one cares what the PR intern has to say about his latest book he's read. Like, it's boring.
Yeah.
And he's not getting any cut through. Just speak your mind. And the thing is, it's all coming out of fear of what people will say.
Well, it's fear of being cancelled now, right? And so it's fear of anyone. Like, even so, I'm was known pretty heavily online as being the zero fucks guy. I would just say what I wanted, and I built a career off that because I felt like I was authentically myself. And if I had an opinion, I would just say it. And if my opinion was wrong, I'd fucking eat shit straight away and learn and go off and, figure something out and then think about it. But I was okay with just sharing my thoughts on something. And what I found was that when I first set up a business, people instantly just wanted to listen to me or wanted to be around me because they knew that I wasn't going to lie to them, that no matter what, I was going to be authentically myself. And they felt, whenever I was in a business meeting, you could just see their shoulders relax as soon as I swore or, was a bit of a dick, because they were like, oh, I don't have to put on a bullshit mask with this guy, right?
Yep.
Now, it's hard to do that, right? Like, it's hard to do that in this society. It's hard to...
Well, I think it's getting easier now.
Do you?
Yeah, I think that tide is going out. This is why interest rates going up and all these problems, I'm like, physics has returned. Suddenly you cannot live in a dream world, and it's like reality bites. And I mean, I kind of have this view, the risk of drifting into politics here,
Well, you are going to be the Prime Minister one day.
Got to be a bigger country, though.
Yeah,
Prime Minister of the world. No.
Please get a secret lair. We can come and visit. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, one of my observations is that actually, I would say 95% of people actually want the same thing.
Yeah.
And what we're actually debating is how do we get there? And people have different opinions on how to get there. And therefore, as soon as you realize that point, you're actually more in agreement with people. And people seem to just lose sight of that. Do people really think that, we should have lots of homeless people? No, it doesn't matter if you're voting left or right.
Yeah.
Nobody really wants to have piles of people that aren't being looked after, but there's a debate on how do we try and resolve that. So let's just start with, we're kind of in agreement. Now let's work out what we want to do about it.
Yeah, that doesn't allow for people to be in their groups either side, though, pretending that they're the right person, right? They're the right.
But I kind of take the view of if you've not got the intellectual capacity for nuance, maybe you're not really worth talking to.
That's going to divide people, right? And I think I empathise with you. I sit solely in the middle, where I think we should be a 9-to-5 culture, the working fucking hard while you're there. If you're not there to turn up and work and improve and self-improve yourself, then what the hell are you doing, right? Like, a lot of people just coast these days, they are literally at home relaxing. And I know for a fact, because I interview them every day, and they're telling me, man, I'm bored as fuck at home and I need to get back into a job because I need to be improving again. I need to like give my life purpose. And so, but I also believe that you should create a nice environment where people can be truly themselves at work, right?
Yep.
And so that means that not a culture where you have to pretend to be someone else. You can come in and just be whoever the fuck you are, right? Yep. And so an open, organic, authentic culture. And so that's what we should be building in terms of instead of slides and fucking, all these stupid things. But yeah, I think I hope that that's the case, that you think that we're getting back that way. I'd love to see it. I'd love to get back to the time where people can just be authentically themselves on any platform in real life or online.
Well, I think the thing that we're starting to see though is kind of the retrospective on being cancelled. And the retro kind of goes to show that mob is very small. They actually don't really have any economic influence. So they're not really going to actually harm you in a major way. And then sometimes, all marketing's good marketing. They actually amplify the thing that they think they're trying to cancel. It's the Streisand effect in action. There's all sorts of things that are just fundamentally broken in folks that sort of hold those views. And I think people are just getting tired of it. Society does move on from things. They get a bit worn out, and we just go, we're done with that. I mean, fundamentally, I think that was one of the challenges with the COVID response, really, is people just get bored of topics and they move on.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and I think you've got to, if you're a student of history, right, like if you look back on generations and generations, we tend to do this all the time. We tend to do crazy little things. We implode, we come back the other way. So it's all cyclical, right? And so like anything, right, don't look at 1 month, don't look at 1 quarter, look at the, over 2 financial years, and that's when you actually start to see the science of what's happening.
I kind of keep coming back to I think there's this high irony, or call it hubris of man, which is that we are somehow always at the best level of thinking in the present, and I read this about like what was the feeling, like why did the first 2 years of COVID kind of feel so bad? And I kind of agreed with this point where it said it's a moment where we realize that we have actually the human race is not in as a stronger position as it was in 2019. We've actually gone backwards. And that's like, there's something deep inside us that's a bit like, oh man, we haven't been carrying the torch right. We've let down. Now, we were dealing with a pandemic, so, there is that. But we seem to continually reinvent things from the past, and I just find it ironic that we don't look back. Like, I'll give a silly example that's not anything to do with politics, but you might have seen these go by, which is the fact that we still can't make concrete that's as good as the Romans made. Yeah. And you're like, it's 2023. And yet we're not kind of going, you know what, the research institute should be all over Roman tech. They were way better than us at this. So I find that stuff quite interesting too.
It's fascinating. Yeah. Like I read as many books as I can get my hands on as well, right? Yeah. So what would you say, like is there books that you're like, oh, you definitely have to read this book? Is there something that, for you changed your life?
Yep. So 2 books. One I did read the old, and this is classic and boring, so we'll go quick. But Rich Dad Poor Dad as a teenager was good for giving a baseline understanding of why you want to get your money working for you. Yep. If you spend, and that's the thing. Nobody likes to be told don't spend all your money. Oh well, that's a point of privilege. Oh, get fucked. Like, just don't spend all your money. The second book that I think has been super profound for me was actually the Snowball, about Warren Buffett. Yeah. And it is a tomb. Like, if you want a bicep workout, buy the physical book. I'd recommend it on Audible. Like all biographies, the first 10% is a bit of a snore fest, because it's great uncle was a soy farmer. Yeah, don't care. The thing I liked about that book is Warren Buffett's obviously established himself as a person of very high integrity and a good reputation, but he's also a complete shark. Yeah. And that's the thing where, again, going back to the nuance, it's like you don't have to be an asshole to win big. Yeah. You can be a high integrity individual. And I think he is an outlier in a lot of ways like that. And you just kind of read through this book and you hear all these stories. And again, like with history, there's been major problems where he's had to intervene and engage and gone out there and really protected a lot of things. And so I've read that book probably 5 or 6 times now. Yeah. And it's just a really good reminder around those points.
Yeah, I read that book too. It's a great book.
Yeah, similar thing as well. Like, how big's headquarters? It's a really small team, high impact. You don't have to do things like the way everybody keeps saying you should.
Yeah, agree. And I think for the year ahead, the hard thing about hard things, like great book for people to read. But I could talk about books for the rest of the afternoon. I know you're a father now, right? So you're turning 40 this year. JD, you're a father. How old are you? How old's your son?
So he is about to turn 4 later in March. His name is Henry, and he's been a profoundly positive impact on my life. Zing and I, we always knew we wanted to have children one day. It was great. There's been, the usual challenge. He learned to walk the week before COVID lockdown, and so when it was like, oh, this might go south, it's like, well, at least at this point we can put this baby on the ground. He just doesn't go anywhere, and then it was like, oh, shit. So, so he's been great. And then that goes back to the Lego stuff. I've got out all my old Lego and been doing that with him and really enjoying that. It's also been super fascinating. I don't say this in a way to insult anybody, but a 3 or 4 year old gives you a lot of insights into how people think, because that you're almost just seeing an earlier layer. So I'm not saying like people are like 4 year olds, but a lot of our base behaviors are already in place at that point. And and a child is not trying. Well, they are trying to manipulate you, but they're not quite as good at it, let's say. So it's pretty obvious what's going on, and you can kind of see similar behaviors and things that happen in adults, and you're like, oh, okay, that actually it's it's not coming from a nefarious place. This is how they're connecting these dots. So it's been really awesome. He's a great little guy.
Yeah, awesome, man. I see you smile, straight away when you're talking about your family, so that's cool. Does that change you as a business owner?
Yes and no. So even before I had a child, I wanted to make sure that Raygun was really family friendly. We have a lot of young folks there. A lot of them have young families. So, we used to get this talk. People go like, when are we going to get an office dog? I'm like, we're not getting an office dog, But let's acknowledge that people have children, and sometimes they can't take them to school, or sometimes there's some reason. So let's make sure we have toys in the office. Let's make sure people feel that they can bring their children here, and that's A-OK, and they can, and that's neat. So we were doing that before I had a kid of my own, and it works out pretty well, I think. I think. My wife talks to me about the idea that you can't run, it's an analogy to 4 gas burners. You can't run all the burners all at 100% all at once. And so I kind of did make the conscious decision that I was like, look, I'm super passionate about business, and I don't want to screw up being a dad. So I was like, frankly, I need to get back into running a little bit. I don't go out socializing as much as I would like to in the past. And that's just an acknowledgement of like, people do that, like, here's 3 things, pick 2. I'm like, well, I'm going to pick 2 things, and that's the family and the business. Yeah. So, yeah.
Awesome, mate. Awesome. And that sort of leads me to my last question, which I think I might know the answer for, but I'm surprised a lot, is I'll ask everyone at the end of the podcast, what makes you happy?
So it's a good question. I mean, certainly the obvious one would be the family life at home. I have a few things there though, I think you might know I'm really into low and slow Texas barbecue, and so combining those things to be like, let's do some ribs, and like let's get Henry out, show him what we're doing and that sort of stuff, and that's a lot of fun. Like that. Sometimes when I have had, I don't know, you get a customer churn that you really didn't want to churn or something like that, going and spending time with the family is the way to sort of break out of that mental trap that you can sometimes get into. So he lifts my spirits quite a lot, as does my wife, obviously.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, I know that you're on a schedule because you have to go and pick him up from daycare.
Be a bad look now to be like, oh, shoot, no.
My son brings me happiness, but I'm just going to chill and talk here for the next hour. So, mate, thank you so much for coming on, JD. I appreciate it. Good luck with Raygun. Good luck with the 40th. As I said to you before the show, life begins at 40. I guarantee you'll tell me that, and that's kind of the secret code that we have to say. When you get your cave in the Bahamas to run the world, please invite me for a low and slow barbecue, mate. Good to chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having us on, and also just, you know, on maybe behalf of the ecosystem. Like, I love seeing this sort of stuff. You know, I just think it's people who go out there and actually do stuff. You know, we should celebrate those people, and 100%. We need more of them. So thank you for putting all of this together.
Mate, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Cool. Well, that was a fun one. We discussed everything from tech, from politics, from JD building a lair somewhere that he's going to be running the country with one day, Lego, you name it. I really enjoyed chatting with JD. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you listened to it and think that it's interesting hearing people's opinions, because that's the reason why we started this podcast. Please subscribe. Thank you to everyone that's subscribing. The podcast is really starting to blow up now, and so I really appreciate everyone that's sit down and subscribed or watched and listened. Thanks so much.
This podcast is produced by John O'Tacker from Empire Films.